best be moving on. Don't you worry now.
Go with God, son. We'll look after things here.
The auctioneer's voice cracked like a whip across the town square. $20 for the Barren
I'll
one.
take her.
Eliza May stood on that platform, her father's hand shoving her forward like livestock, while strangers assessed her worth in coin.
Knows how to stay.
She'd been called worthless, broken, defective,
Eliza,
until a quiet voice from the
there's
back
something you
said,
need to know about
"I'll
why
take
I
her."
truly came here.
Not because she could give him heirs,
been honest
but because he saw something nobody else did, a woman worth choosing. Before we begin, please subscribe to our channel and stay with us until the very end of this story.
Breathe through it.
Comment below with your city, so we can see how far Eliza's journey reaches across the world.
I best be moving on. Don't you worry
The morning
now.
Eliza's father
Go with
decided to
God,
sell her,
son. We'll
the
look
sky
after
hung
things
gray
here.
and indifferent over Dust Creek, Wyoming, as if God himself had turned away. She stood in the kitchen, hands trembling over the dishes, when Benjamin May walked in, with that look, the one she'd learned to fear more than his fists. "Get your shawl," he said flatly. "We're going to town." Her younger sister Martha looked up from her sewing eyes wide. "Papa, it's not market day." "Shut your mouth, girl. This doesn't concern you." But it did concern Martha. It concerned everyone in the May household, because for 2 years now, Eliza had been the family shame. Married at 19 to Thomas Hewitt, a merchant's son with prospects and property. Divorced at 21 when no child came. Returned to her father's house like spoiled goods, like a broken plow that couldn't turn soil. In the wagon, her father didn't speak. He didn't need to. Eliza had heard the whispers in church, seen the pitying looks from women who clutched their babies closer when she passed, as if barrenness were contagious. Her mother had died 2 winters ago, and without her gentle buffer, Benjamin May had grown cold and practical. A daughter who couldn't produce grandchildren was a mouth to feed with no return on investment. "Papa," Eliza finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where are we going?" "To fix a problem." Her stomach turned to ice. The town square of Dust Creek bustled with the usual Saturday commerce, farmers selling grain, women bartering for cloth, children chasing each other between wagons. But today, a crowd had gathered near the auctioneer's platform, and Eliza's blood ran cold when she saw other women standing there. Young women, older women, women with hollow eyes and threadbare dresses. The bride auction. "No," Eliza breathed, pulling back against her father's grip. "Papa, no, please." "You'll do as you're told." His fingers dug into her arm like iron. "You think I can afford to keep you? Feed you? You're 23 years old, Eliza, and you've got nothing to offer any decent man. This is your last chance." "I'll work," she pleaded, stumbling as he dragged her forward. "I'll take in washing. You'll get up on that platform, and you'll be grateful someone might want you at all." The auctioneer, a rotund man named Chester Boyle, grinned when he saw Benjamin approach. "Well, well, May. Heard you might be coming. This the Barren one." Eliza flinched at the word spoken so casually, as if her deepest wound were merely a product description. "She is," her father said, "but she's strong. Good cook. Keeps a clean house." Chester's eyes traveled over her with the same assessment he'd give a horse. "Pretty enough face, I suppose. Shame about the rest." He raised his voice to the crowd. "Folks, we got one more for you today. Eliza May, 23 years of age, experienced in household management." "What about children?" someone shouted from the crowd. Chester's smile thinned. "Well, now, she was married before, didn't take. But that doesn't mean she can't keep a good home for a man who needs one." "How much?" another voice called. "We'll start at $40. Silence fell over the square. $40 was half the price of a good steer. The insult burned through Eliza's chest, but she kept her chin up, refusing to let them see her break. She searched the crowd for a kind face, for anything resembling mercy, but saw only calculation and disdain. $40. A man near the front scoffed. "For a woman who can't give you sons, I'll give you 15, and that's generous." 15, Chester called. "Do I hear 20? Silence. 15, going once. 20. A woman's sharp voice cut through the air. Eliza turned to see Widow Hartley, a bitter old woman who ran a boarding house and treated her workers like slaves. $20, and she'll work off every penny. 20. Do I hear 25? Eliza's heart hammered. She'd heard stories about Widow Hartley's establishment. Women worked to the bone, barely fed, never allowed to leave. It wasn't a home. It was a prison. 20 going once. 30. The voice came from the back of the crowd, quiet but clear. Heads turned, and the crowd parted slowly to reveal a tall man in his mid-30s, weathered face, shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He walked forward with unhurried steps, his dark eyes fixed not on the auctioneer, but on Eliza herself. $30. He repeated, stopping at the base of the platform. Cash. Chester's eyebrows rose. Well, now, Mr. Cole didn't expect to see you here today. Thought you swore off marrying again after... He stopped himself, clearing his throat awkwardly. $30. Do I hear 35? Widow Hartley's mouth pressed into a thin line. She shook her head and turned away. 30 going once. 30 going twice. Chester's gavel came down with a sharp crack. Sold to Garrett Cole of Cole Ranch. Eliza's knees nearly buckled. She'd heard of Garrett Cole, everyone had. A widower who'd lost his wife 3 years ago in childbirth along with the baby. He'd become something of a ghost since then, rarely coming to town, keeping to his ranch in the northern hills. Some said grief had driven him half mad. Others said he'd turned cold as stone. Her father materialized beside the platform, already counting the money Cole handed him. Not a word of goodbye. Not a glance back at his daughter. Just 30 pieces of silver and a nod before he climbed back into his wagon and drove away. Eliza stood frozen on the platform, watching her father disappear down the dusty street. She'd known he didn't love her, not anymore. Perhaps not ever, but the finality of it struck her like a physical blow. Ma'am? She turned to find Garrett Cole standing below, one hand extended up toward her. Not grabbing, not demanding, offering. We can wait if you need a minute, he said quietly. It was the gentleness in his voice that undid her. She descended the steps, ignoring his hand, and stood before him with what little dignity she could muster. Up close, she could see the lines of grief etched around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair. He looked tired. Unbearably tired. I don't need children, he said, as if answering a question she hadn't asked. I need someone who knows how to stay. Eliza blinked, unsure how to respond. Was that a warning? A reassurance she couldn't tell. My horse is at the livery, Garrett continued. I have a wagon. I'll get your things from... He paused, glancing after Benjamin May's departed wagon. Do you have things? One bag, Eliza said, her voice hollow. At my father's house. We'll get it. They walked through town in silence, Eliza acutely aware of the stares following them. Women clustered in doorways, whispering behind their hands. Men watched from the saloon porch, judgment clear in their eyes. At the mercantile, Mrs. Patterson actually crossed herself as if Eliza carried some curse. Let them look, Garrett said softly. They'll get bored eventually. But Eliza knew they wouldn't. This would be talked about for months, years maybe. The barren woman and the grieving widower brought together in desperation. What a pair they made. At her father's house, she could no longer think of it as home. Martha met them at the door, tears streaming down her face. She pressed a small cloth bag into Eliza's hands. I packed what I could, Martha whispered. Your mother's Bible, the blue dress, the silver comb. Martha. I'm so sorry, Eliza. I tried to talk to him. I swear I tried. I know. Eliza embraced her sister tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender soap. It's not your fault. Take care of yourself, sweet girl. Will you write to me? Eliza looked at Garrett, who nodded once. Yes, she promised. I'll write. But as they drove away in Garrett's wagon, Eliza wondered if she'd ever see Martha again. Her father would probably forbid it. Another door closing, another tie severed. By the time they reached the edge of town, she felt hollowed out, empty as a dried gourd. "Cole Ranch is about 2 hours north," Garrett said, breaking the long silence. "We'll be there before dark." What do you expect of me?" He was quiet for a long moment, guiding the horses around a bend in the road. "Expect as your wife. I assume that's what this is." "I suppose that's the legal term for it," Garrett said carefully. "But I'm not looking for what most men look for in a wife. I'm looking for someone to help run a household that's been falling apart for 3 years. Someone to manage the house while I manage the land. Someone who won't leave." That word again. Stay. As if departure were the greatest sin imaginable. "Your first wife," Eliza ventured carefully. "She died." His jaw tightened. "Yes." "I'm sorry." "So am I." They didn't speak again for several miles. The landscape shifted from the dusty flats of Dust Creek to rolling hills covered in spring grass. Mountains rose in the distance, still capped with snow. It was beautiful country, Eliza had to admit. Wild and open and free in a way that made her chest ache. As the sun began its descent, they crested a ridge, and Eliza saw Cole Ranch spread out in the valley below. A 2-story house, weathered but solid. A large barn, several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses. Smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting someone was home. "My mother lives with me," Garrett said, as if reading her thoughts. "She's particular, set in her ways, but the house is big enough that you won't be in each other's way much." Eliza heard the warning beneath his words. "She's difficult. She won't like you. Prepare yourself." They descended into the valley as twilight painted the sky purple and gold. By the time they reached the house, darkness had fallen and lamplight glowed warmly in the windows. It should have felt welcoming. Instead, Eliza's stomach twisted with dread. Garrett helped her down from the wagon and retrieved her small bag. "I'll show you to your room. We can talk more in the morning when you're rested." But before they could reach the porch, the front door swung open and a woman stood silhouetted against the light. She was perhaps 60, with iron-gray hair pulled severely back and a face that might have been beautiful, once before bitterness carved lines around her mouth. "So," the woman said coldly, "you actually went through with it." "Mother," Garrett said, his voice flat. "This is Eliza. Eliza, my mother, Virginia Cole." "Mrs. Cole," Eliza said, attempting a polite smile. "Thank you for—" "Don't thank me for anything." Virginia cut her off. "I didn't want you here. I told my son he was making a mistake, but he doesn't listen to sense anymore. Not since—" She stopped herself, lips pressing into a thin line. "Mother," Garrett said, a warning note in his voice. "I suppose you'll be wanting supper." Virginia continued, ignoring him. "There's cold stew in the kitchen. I'm going to bed. Don't make noise." She turned on her heel and disappeared into the house. Eliza stood frozen on the porch, humiliation burning through her. In one day she'd been sold like livestock, paraded before a jeering crowd, and now welcomed into her new home with open hostility. She wanted to cry, to scream, to run back to Dust Creek, and what there was nowhere to run to. "I apologize for my mother," Garrett said quietly. "She's grieving still. We both are. She doesn't mean—" "Yes, she does," Eliza said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "She means every word. And I understand. I'm an intruder here. A reminder of what you lost." Garrett looked at her for a long moment, something like surprise flickering in his dark eyes. "Come inside," he finally said. "You need to eat." The house was as cold inside as Virginia's welcome. Clean, certainly everything polished and orderly, but devoid of warmth of life. It felt like a mausoleum, a place where grief had been preserved and displayed like a body in a coffin. Garrett led her to the kitchen, where indeed a pot of stew sat on the stove barely warm. He ladled some into a bowl for her, set it on the table with a piece of bread, and then stood awkwardly by the door, as if uncertain whether to stay or go. "Aren't you eating?" Eliza asked. "I ate earlier." "Then you don't need to watch me." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You're direct." "I've had a difficult day, Mr. Cole. I don't have energy for pretense." "Garrett," he corrected. "And yes, I imagine you have. I'll show you to your room when you're finished." He left her alone then, and Eliza ate the lukewarm stew in silence, each spoonful feeling like lead in her stomach. Through the walls she could hear the faint creak of footsteps above the sound of doors closing. This house held secrets, she thought. Pain layered over pain, grief compounded with silence. When she finished, she found Garrett waiting in the hallway. He led her upstairs to a small bedroom at the end of the hall. It was simply furnished: a bed, a dresser, a chair by the window, clean but impersonal, like a room in a boarding house. "This was the sewing room," Garrett explained. "But it'll serve. There are extra blankets in the dresser if you need them. The privy is out back. My room is downstairs if you need anything." "Thank you." He hesitated in the doorway. "Eliza, what I said in town about not needing children, I meant it. I'm not expecting... We don't have to..." He struggled for words, color rising in his weathered cheeks. "I understand," Eliza said, saving him from further embarrassment. "This is a business arrangement, nothing more." Relief flooded his face, followed quickly by something that might have been shame. "Yes, exactly. Well, good night then." "Good night." He closed the door, and Eliza was finally blessedly alone. She sank onto the bed, her bag clutched in her lap, and only then did she allow the tears to come. Silent, burning tears that she pressed into her sleeve, terrified Virginia might hear and find yet another reason to despise her. She cried for her lost marriage, for her father's betrayal, for Martha's frightened face at the door. She cried for the children she would never bear, for the shame that followed her like a shadow, for the loneliness that pressed against her chest like a physical weight. But eventually the tears stopped. They always did. And in the silence that followed, Eliza unpacked her small bag with deliberate movements. Her mother's Bible went on the dresser, the silver comb beside it. The blue dress she hung carefully in the narrow wardrobe. As she changed into her nightgown, she caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the dresser. 23 years old, and she looked ancient, tired, used up, barren. She turned away from her reflection and climbed into bed. The sheets smelled of lavender, fresh and clean. Someone, Garrett, probably not Virginia, had made sure the room was ready for her. That small kindness, undeserved and unexpected, brought fresh tears to her eyes. Outside her window, the wind whispered through the cottonwood trees. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, and in the room below she heard Garrett's footsteps pacing back and forth like a man who'd forgotten how to sleep. Eliza lay in the darkness listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her new home and wondered what bargain she'd actually made today. Garrett Cole had bought her. There was no prettier word for it. But what did he expect in return? Companionship service. Or just someone to fill the silence his wife had left behind. "I don't need children," he'd said. "I need someone who knows how to stay." As if Eliza had anywhere else to go. As if she were capable of leaving even if she wanted to. She'd been sold after all. Purchased. And whether the cage was gilded or plain, it was still a cage. But even as that bitter thought crossed her mind, another memory surfaced. Garrett's hand extended toward her on the auction platform. Not grabbing, not demanding, offering. And his voice quiet but firm, facing down the crowd. "I don't need children. I need someone who knows how to stay." Perhaps Eliza thought as sleep finally claimed her. Perhaps that wasn't a prison sentence after all. Perhaps it was something else entirely. Something she couldn't yet name, but might learn to recognize as freedom, if she survived Virginia Cole long enough to find out. Morning came too early. announced by a sharp knock on Eliza's door that felt more like an accusation than a greeting. "Breakfast is at 6. Virginia's voice cut through the wood. "If you want to eat, you'll be down in 10 minutes. Eliza jolted upright, disoriented in the unfamiliar room. Gray light filtered through the curtains barely enough to see by. She scrambled out of bed, her feet hitting the cold floor, and dressed quickly in the dim light. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons of her dress, still clumsy with exhaustion. She'd barely slept, kept awake by the strangeness of everything. The sounds of the house settling the wind against the windows, the knowledge that she was now living among strangers who neither wanted nor welcomed her. She made it downstairs with perhaps 30 seconds to spare. The kitchen was warm, at least a fire already crackling in the stove. Virginia stood at the counter, her back rigid as a fence post slicing bread with sharp, efficient movements. Garrett sat at the table, coffee cup in hand, his eyes shadowed with the same sleeplessness Eliza felt. "Sit," Virginia said without turning around. "I don't serve food twice." Eliza slid into a chair across from Garrett, who offered her a brief apologetic glance before returning his attention to his coffee. Virginia placed plates in front of them. Eggs, bacon, biscuits, all cooked perfectly, but served with such coldness that the food might as well have been stones. "Thank you," Eliza said quietly. Virginia didn't respond. She took her own plate to the far end of the table, as far from Eliza as the furniture allowed, and ate in pointed silence. Garrett cleared his throat. "I'll be mending the north fence today. Should be back by early afternoon." "I'll need help with the washing," Virginia said. "All the linens need doing." "Eliza can help you," Garrett said. "I didn't ask for her help." "Mother, I've managed this house for 3 years without assistance. I don't need it now." Garrett's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He finished his breakfast, quickly grabbed his hat from the peg by the door, and paused beside Eliza's chair. "If you need anything," he said quietly, "anything at all, come find me." Then he was gone, leaving Eliza alone with Virginia and the suffocating silence that pressed down like a physical weight. Eliza ate her breakfast slowly, tasting nothing. When she finished, she stood and began gathering the dishes. "Leave them," Virginia snapped. "This is my kitchen. I'll handle it." "I'd like to help." "I said leave them." Virginia's eyes were hard as flint. "You want to be useful? Go dust the parlor. The rags are in the hall closet." For 3 days it continued like this. Virginia assigned Eliza tasks with curt commands: dust this, sweep that, polish the silver, but refused to allow her into the kitchen or anywhere Virginia considered her territory. Eliza moved through the house like a ghost, trying to make herself small, trying not to disturb the carefully maintained shrine to grief that permeated every room. Because that's what it was, she realized. A shrine. In the parlor, a woman's shawl still draped over the back of a chair. In the dining room, a place setting remained at the table's head, as if someone might return to claim it. Upstairs, a door stayed locked, and when Eliza asked Garrett about it, his face went pale. "That was Catherine's room," he said, voice hollow. "My wife's. Mother keeps it, as it was. For 3 years. Yes." Eliza wanted to say this wasn't healthy, that grief shouldn't be preserved like a pickled specimen, but she held her tongue. She had no right to judge how these people mourned. She was an intruder here, purchased help, who'd been told repeatedly that her presence was neither needed nor wanted. On the 4th morning, Eliza woke before Virginia's knock and dressed in the pre-dawn darkness. She made her way downstairs, determined to at least make coffee to contribute something beyond dusting furniture and staying out of the way. But when she entered the kitchen, Virginia was already there, and the look she turned on Eliza could have curdled milk. "What do you think you're doing?" "I thought I'd help with breakfast." "I don't need your help. I've told you that." "Mrs. Cole, please." Eliza fought to keep her voice steady. "I'm trying. I know you don't want me here, but I am here, and I'd like to be useful. I'd like to earn my place." "Earn your place?" Virginia's laugh was bitter as ash. You think you can earn what you were bought for. You think dusting my parlor and keeping out of my way makes you part of this family. No, Eliza said quietly. I don't think that at all. I think I'm hired help at best, and at worst I'm a reminder of everything you lost. But I'm here regardless, and I don't know what else to do except try. Virginia stared at her for a long moment, something flickering behind her eyes that might have been surprise, or respect, or merely recalculation. You want to be useful, she finally said. Fine. There's a root cellar that needs organizing. It's a mess. Sort through it. Throw out anything spoiled. Don't bother me with questions. It was dismissal, pure and simple. Busy work designed to keep Eliza out of sight. But Eliza nodded and went outside to find the root cellar grateful at least for a task that didn't require her to tiptoe through Virginia's grief. The cellar was indeed a mess. Shelves piled with jars of preserves. Some dating back years, sacks of potatoes sprouting in the dim light, onions gone soft with rot. Eliza spent the entire morning down there sorting, cleaning, making lists of what needed replenishing. It was cold, damp work, and by midday her hands were numb and filthy, but at least it was work. At least it was purpose. She was hauling out a sack of spoiled turnips when she heard children's voices. She froze, listening. They came from somewhere beyond the barn, high, bright voices calling to each other in play. Curious Eliza followed the sound and found a group of 5 children playing in the tall grass near the creek. They couldn't have been more than 6 to 10 years old, dressed in ragged clothes, their faces smudged with dirt. "Hello," Eliza called out. The children startled like deer. The oldest, a girl with tangled red hair, stepped protectively in front of the others. "We weren't doing nothing wrong, ma'am. We were just playing." "I can see that," Eliza said gently. "I'm not angry. I didn't know there were children living nearby." "We don't live nowhere," a small boy piped up. "We just go where we go." Eliza's heart clenched. Orphans. The frontier was full of them children whose parents had died of disease accidents, or simply abandoned them when times got hard. They traveled in small packs, foraging, stealing when they had to, surviving however they could. "Are you hungry?" Eliza asked. 5 pairs of eyes lit up with desperate hope. "Yes, ma'am," the red-haired girl said carefully. "But we don't want no trouble." "It's not trouble. Wait here." Eliza hurried back to the kitchen, praying Virginia had gone upstairs. The kitchen was empty, thank God. She quickly wrapped bread, cheese, and some cold chicken in a cloth and brought it back to the children, who fell on the food like wolves. "What are your names?" Eliza asked as they ate. "I'm Annie," the red-haired girl said. "That's my brother Tommy, and these are Ben, Sarah, and little Joe. We've been traveling together since the winter." "Where are your families?" Annie's face closed down. "Dead mostly. Or gone. Don't matter which." Eliza's throat tightened. These children abandoned, forgotten, living like wild animals, their situation struck something deep in her chest. They were unwanted too. Cast aside by circumstances or cruelty or simple bad luck. Just like her. "Can you read?" she asked suddenly. Annie shook her head. "Never learned." "Would you like to—" The children exchanged glances, suspicious of this kindness from a stranger. "Why?" Tommy asked. "What do you want from us?" "Nothing," Eliza said. I used to teach before I was married. I could teach you if you'd like. Letters, numbers, reading. Useful things." "We don't got money to pay you," Annie said. "I don't want money. I just want—" What did she want? Eliza searched for the words. "I want to do something that matters. Will you come back tomorrow? Same time." The children looked at each other, having some silent conversation Eliza couldn't follow. Finally, Annie nodded. "We'll come. But if it's a trick—" "It's not a trick, I promise." They disappeared into the grass like ghosts, and Eliza returned to the cellar with something she hadn't felt since arriving at Cole Ranch Hope. Small, fragile, but real. That evening at supper, she mentioned the children to Garrett. Virginia's fork clattered against her plate. You fed vagrant children from my kitchen. I gave them some bread and cheese that would have gone stale anyway. You had no right. I had every right, Eliza said, surprising herself with her own firmness. This is my home now too, isn't it? Or am I just a servant who's not allowed to make any decisions? Virginia's face flushed with anger, but Garrett spoke before she could respond. What about the children? He asked Eliza. They're orphans, living rough. I thought I might teach them. Reading, writing, basic arithmetic, just an hour or two each day. Absolutely not, Virginia said. I won't have ragamuffins and thieves skulking around this property. They're not thieves, they're children. It's a waste of time. They'll just grow up to be drifters and criminals anyway. Mother, Garrett said quietly, but with an edge that made Virginia fall silent. He looked at Eliza. Where would you teach them? The barn, maybe, if that's all right with you. He was quiet for a long moment, and Eliza held her breath waiting for his refusal. But then he nodded slowly. The barn's fine. Use whatever space you need. Just be careful. Some folks in town won't like it. They'll say you're encouraging vagrancy. Let them say what they want, Eliza said. Those children need someone. Something shifted in Garrett's expression, respect maybe, or recognition. Yes, he said softly. I suppose they do. Virginia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is a mistake. Mark my words, this will end badly. She stormed from the kitchen, her footsteps heavy on the stairs. Garrett sighed. Don't mind her. It's been hard for her. It's been hard for you too, Eliza said. But you're not taking it out on strangers. Aren't I? Garrett's smile was sad. I bought a woman at auction because I couldn't face my empty house anymore. That's not exactly kindness. You gave me a home when I had nowhere else to go. You've been nothing but decent to me. That counts for something. Does it? He stared into his coffee cup as if it held answers. Sometimes I think decency is just another word for cowardice. It's easier to be polite than honest. What would honesty sound like? He looked up at her. Then his dark eyes full of something raw and painful. It would sound like this: I'm drowning in this house. I'm drowning in grief and guilt, and my mother's bitterness, and I thought bringing someone new here might, I don't know, change something, break the spell. But it hasn't, has it? You're just drowning too now. Eliza felt the truth of his words like a weight settling over her shoulders. Yes, she admitted. I am drowning, but maybe teaching those children will give me something to hold on to, something that's mine. Then teach them, Garrett said, and don't let anyone tell you it's wrong. The next morning the children came back, and the morning after that. By the end of the week, word had spread somehow, and 3 more children appeared shy, hungry, desperate for attention. Eliza set up a makeshift school in the barn, using old crates as desks and a plank of wood as a chalkboard. She taught them their letters using a stick and dirt when chalk ran out. She taught them to count using pebbles and dried beans. She taught them that they mattered, that they were worth someone's time and attention. And for the first time since arriving at Cole Ranch, Eliza felt something other than despair. She felt useful. She felt needed. The children looked at her with trust in their eyes, and that trust was more valuable than gold. But Virginia's prediction proved accurate. Word reached Dust Creek about the Barren woman teaching vagrant children, and the whispers started again. Women crossed the street when they saw Garrett in town. The minister mentioned in his Sunday sermon the importance of maintaining proper social boundaries. And one by one, families started coming to retrieve children who'd been attending Eliza's lessons. This ain't proper, one father said, yanking his son away from the barn. Learning from a woman like you. It's not right. A woman like me. Eliza repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. You know what I mean. Divorced, barren, living in sin with a man you barely know. Iad. I'm married to him, Eliza said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. Were they married? There'd been no ceremony, no vows, just a transaction and a signature on a bill of sale. "That's what you call it," the man spat in the dirt. "Keep away from my boy. I don't want him corrupted." Within 2 weeks, only Annie, Tommy, Ben, Sarah, and little Joe remained the orphans with nowhere else to go, and no one to forbid them, and even they came less frequently frightened by the hostility that seemed to follow Eliza wherever she went. "We're causing you trouble," Annie said one morning. "Maybe we should stop coming." "No," Eliza said firmly. "You're not causing anything. Small-minded people cause trouble, not children trying to learn. You keep coming as long as you want to." But the joy had leaked out of it. Eliza continued teaching, but her heart felt heavy, weighted down by the realization that even this small thing, this one good thing, was being poisoned by judgment and fear. Garrett noticed. He came to the barn one afternoon and stood in the doorway watching as Eliza helped little Joe sound out words. When the lesson ended and the children scattered, he approached her slowly. "I heard what happened in town," he said. "Of course you did. Bad news travels fast." "It's not bad news. You're teaching children who need teaching. That's good work." "The town doesn't seem to think so." Garrett was quiet for a moment, then said, "My wife used to do something similar. Not teaching, but she'd take in strays, animals mostly, but sometimes people too. Mother hated it. Said Catherine was too soft-hearted, that she'd get taken advantage of. They fought about it constantly." This was the first time Garrett had volunteered information about his wife. Eliza held very still, afraid that any movement might make him stop talking. "Catherine died because of her soft heart." Garrett continued, his voice rough. "There was a woman in town pregnant, nowhere to go. Catherine insisted on taking her in. The woman had typhoid fever, though nobody knew it yet. By the time we realized, Catherine had caught it too. She was pregnant herself, 7 months along. The fever—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "The fever killed them both. The baby came too early. Didn't even live an hour." "I'm so sorry," Eliza whispered. "Mother blames Catherine for dying. Says if she'd been more careful, more cautious, she'd still be alive. But I think Mother's wrong. Catherine died being exactly who she was, someone who couldn't turn away from people in need. And maybe that's not soft-heartedness. Maybe that's just strength in a different shape." He looked at Eliza, then really looked at her, and she saw tears shining in his eyes. "Don't let them make you small," he said. "Don't let them convince you that caring is weakness. Those children need you. Keep teaching them. Even if it causes you trouble. Especially then." Something passed between them in that moment, understanding perhaps, or recognition. They were both survivors of other people's judgments, both trying to find meaning in the wreckage of broken expectations. "Thank you," Eliza said, "for telling me about Catherine, for trusting me with that." Garrett nodded once, then left the barn, his shoulders heavy with the weight of memories. And Eliza stood alone in the dusty space, surrounded by makeshift desks and scattered primers, and felt for the first time that maybe, just maybe, she belonged here after all. But that fragile sense of belonging shattered 3 days later when she came to the barn for lessons and found it empty. She waited an hour, 2 hours. None of the children came. Finally, she walked to the creek where they sometimes played and found Annie alone, her face tear-stained. "They took them," Annie said. "The sheriff came this morning, said it wasn't proper for orphans to be running wild, said they was going to the county home in Cheyenne. And you?" "I ran. I always run when adults start making decisions." Annie's voice was bitter beyond her years. "Tommy didn't run fast enough. They got him too." Eliza felt something crack inside her chest. "I'll talk to the sheriff. Won't do no good. You're already trouble to them. You speak up, they'll just dig in harder." Annie wiped her nose on her sleeve. "I'm leaving. Heading south maybe. Can't stay here no more." "Annie, please let me help." "You can't help, ma'am. You're kind and I'm grateful for what you taught me, but you can't fix this. Nobody can." She turned to go, then paused. You should leave too, you know. This place, it's eating you up. I can see it. You're getting smaller every day." Then she was gone, vanishing into the tall grass like smoke, and Eliza was alone again. Completely alone. She walked back to the house in a daze, her mind reeling. The children were gone. Her small school, her one source of purpose, had been dismantled by fearful adults who saw danger in everything they didn't understand. She found Garrett in the stable brushing down his horse. When he saw her face, he set down the brush immediately. What happened? She told him everything, the sheriff, the county home, Annie running away. By the time she finished, tears were streaming down her face, though she barely noticed them. "I'm sorry," Garrett said quietly. "I know how much that meant to you." "It wasn't just about me. Those children needed—" Her voice broke. "They needed someone to see them, to treat them like they mattered. And now they're being locked away in some institution where they'll be just numbers, just mouths to feed." Garrett reached out slowly and awkwardly patted her shoulder. It was the first time he'd touched her since helping her down from the wagon that first day. "I'm sorry," he said again, because what else was there to say? That night, Eliza lay in her narrow bed and felt the darkness pressing down like a living thing. Virginia hated her. The town despised her. The children were gone. And Garrett kind, grieving Garrett. What was he to her? A reluctant protector, an employer, certainly not a husband, not in any real sense. She was so terribly, achingly alone. The next morning she woke to find a wool coat laid across the chair by her door. It was well made, lined with flannel far too fine to be a cast-off. She lifted it slowly and found a note pinned to the collar in Garrett's careful handwriting. This was Catherine's. "Mother wanted to burn it, but I couldn't let her. It should keep someone warm. Might as well be you." Eliza pressed the coat to her face and let herself cry for Catherine, for Garrett, for the children, for herself. For everyone who'd been broken by loss and judgment and the casual cruelty of people too frightened to be kind. But when the tears stopped, she put on the coat and went downstairs. Virginia stood in the kitchen, her face carved from stone, when she saw Eliza wearing her dead daughter-in-law's coat. "How dare you?" Virginia hissed. "Garrett gave it to me. He had no right. He had every right. This is his house, his coat, his decision." They stared at each other across the kitchen table, two women bound together by grief and circumstance, and a man who'd lost too much already. "You think you can replace her?" Virginia finally said, her voice shaking. "You think wearing her coat, living in her house makes you—" "I don't think I can replace her," Eliza interrupted. "I don't think anyone could. But I'm here, Mrs. Cole. I'm here, and I'm not leaving, no matter how much you wish I would. So we can spend the rest of our lives making each other miserable, or we can find a way to exist under the same roof without drawing blood. Your choice." Virginia's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. For a moment, Eliza thought the older woman might actually strike her. But then, Virginia's shoulders sagged, and she looked suddenly unbearably old. "I don't know how to stop being angry," Virginia whispered. "Neither do I," Eliza admitted. "But maybe we don't have to stop. Maybe we just have to learn to be angry at the right things." They stood in silence, the morning light streaming through the window, and something shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first hairline crack in the wall between them. And upstairs in the room where Garrett lay sleepless most nights, he heard their voices and allowed himself the smallest flicker of hope. Winter arrived early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with a vengeance that caught everyone unprepared. The first snow fell in mid-October, heavy and relentless, blanketing the valley in white silence. Garrett spent longer hours away from the house, checking on cattle, reinforcing shelters, preparing for the brutal months ahead. Virginia retreated further into herself, spending most days in Catherine's locked room, emerging only for meals that grew increasingly silent and tense. And Eliza found herself caught in the middle, trying to maintain a household where two people were slowly drowning in grief, while pretending everything was fine. The fragile truce she and Virginia had reached that morning in the kitchen had held barely, but it was more absence of hostility than presence of warmth. Virginia no longer made cutting remarks, but she didn't make conversation either. She existed in the house like a ghost present, but not really there, going through motions that had lost all meaning. Garrett noticed, of course. He said nothing, but Eliza saw the worry in his eyes when he looked at his mother, saw the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders like the snow piling up on the roof. "She's getting worse," Eliza said to him one evening in late October. They were in the kitchen, Garrett repairing a broken chair leg, while Eliza kneaded bread dough. Virginia had gone to bed early again, claiming a headache. "I know," Garrett said quietly. "She spends all day in Catherine's room. That can't be healthy." "I know that too." "Have you tried talking to her?" Garrett's hands stilled on the chair. "What would I say? Mother, please stop grieving. Mother, it's been 3 years, time to move on." She'd slap me, and she'd be right to. "I'm not suggesting she stop grieving. I'm suggesting she stop living in a shrine. That room is all she has left of Catherine." "No," Eliza said more sharply than she intended. "She has you. You're still here, still alive, but she can't see past the person who's gone to notice the one who's stayed." Garrett looked at her, then something flickering in his eyes. Pain recognition, maybe anger. "You don't understand." "I understand more than you think. I understand what it's like to be invisible because you're not what people wanted you to be. I understand what it's like to live in the shadow of someone else's expectations." Eliza's hands pressed into the dough with unnecessary force. "Your mother looks at me and sees a poor replacement for Catherine. You look at me and see what hired help. A warm body to fill an empty space. That's not fair." "Isn't it? You bought me Garrett. You paid $30 to have someone in this house who wasn't your mother or a memory. But you don't talk to me. You don't confide in me. You barely look at me most days. I'm just furniture that occasionally moves around and makes bread." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and honest and painful. Garrett set down the chair leg carefully, his jaw tight. "You're right," he said finally. "You're absolutely right. I've been selfish and cowardly, and I've treated you exactly how I swore I wouldn't." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "I thought bringing someone here would fix things. I thought it would force Mother and me to engage with life again, to stop drowning in the past. But all I did was drag you into the water with us." "I know," Eliza said, her anger draining away as quickly as it had come. "I've known since the first day. But I'm here anyway, Garrett. I don't have anywhere else to be. So either we all drown together, or we figure out how to swim." "I don't know how to swim anymore." "Then we'll learn together." He looked at her for a long moment, and Eliza saw something shift in his expression, a lowering of defenses perhaps, or simply exhaustion with maintaining them. "Catherine used to say that," he said softly. "When things got hard, she'd say, 'We'll figure it out together.' I'd forgotten that." "Tell me about her," Eliza said. "Not how she died, how she lived." Garrett was quiet for so long that Eliza thought he wouldn't answer. But then he started talking, his voice low and hesitant at first, then gaining strength as memories surfaced. "She was stubborn," he said. "God, she was stubborn. When we first married, Mother tried to teach her the proper way to run a household, and Catherine smiled and nodded, and then did everything her own way. Drove Mother crazy." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She sang all the time. Couldn't carry a tune worth a damn, but she sang anyway. While cooking, while cleaning, while hanging laundry. The house was never quiet when Catherine was alive." "She sounds wonderful." "She was. She was also infuriating and impulsive and so damn convinced she could fix everything. Every stray animal, every person in trouble, she thought she could save them all." His smile faded. "That's what killed her. That certainty that her goodness could overcome anything. You can't blame her for being kind. I don't blame her. I blame myself. I should have said no when she wanted to take in that woman. I knew it was dangerous, knew the risk, But Catherine looked at me with those eyes, and I couldn't. He stopped his throat working. I couldn't deny her anything, and it killed her. Eliza abandoned the bread dough and sat down across from him. Garrett, listen to me. You can't spend the rest of your life punishing yourself for being human, for loving your wife enough to give her what she wanted. That's not guilt, that's just love with nowhere left to go. Where does it go then? His voice cracked. Where does all this love go when the person's gone? I don't know. Maybe into the living. Maybe into the next person who needs it. Maybe into just getting through the day without falling apart. Eliza reached across the table and did something she'd never done before. She took his hand. His fingers were calloused warm, and they closed around hers with a desperation that broke her heart. You don't have to figure it all out tonight. You just have to get through tonight. They sat like that for a long time, holding hands across the kitchen table, while the fire crackled in the stove and snow whispered against the windows. And for the first time since coming to Cole Ranch, Eliza felt like she was actually part of something, not just a ghost, haunting the edges of other people's grief. But that moment of connection shattered 3 nights later when Virginia's screaming woke the house. Eliza bolted from her bed, heart hammering, and met Garrett in the hallway. He was already racing toward his mother's room, and Eliza followed, fear clawing at her throat. They found Virginia on the floor of Catherine's room, surrounded by scattered photographs and letters, her face twisted with anguish. "She's gone," Virginia wailed, clutching a photograph to her chest. "She's really gone. She's never coming back, and I can't. Garrett dropped to his knees beside his mother, trying to gather her into his arms, but Virginia fought him, her grief manifesting as rage. "You let her die. You should have stopped her, should have protected her. Mother, please. She was everything good in this world, and you let her die." "I know," Garrett said, his own voice breaking. "I know, Mother, I know." Eliza stood frozen in the doorway, watching this raw display of pain that had been locked away for 3 years finally bursting free. Virginia sobbed against Garrett's chest, and he held her, tears streaming down his own face, and they grieved together the way they should have done years ago. Eventually, Virginia's sobs subsided into exhausted hiccups. Garrett helped her to her feet and guided her toward her own bedroom. "Sleep," he said gently. "We'll talk in the morning." "I'm sorry," Virginia whispered. "I'm so sorry, Garrett." "I know. Me too." After Virginia's door closed, Garrett stood in the hallway, visibly shaking. Eliza approached him carefully, the way one might approach a wounded animal. "Are you all right?" "No." His voice was hollow. "But I will be, eventually. Come downstairs. I'll make coffee." They sat at the kitchen table until dawn, not talking much, just existing in each other's presence. Eliza made coffee, then eggs and toast when the sun finally rose. Garrett ate mechanically, his eyes distant. "She's been holding that in for 3 years, he said finally. "I knew she blamed me, but I didn't realize how much." "She doesn't blame you. She blames God, fate, the universe, and you're just the closest target." "Maybe. But she's not wrong, is she? I should have said no. I should have protected Catherine." You can't protect people from themselves, from their own goodness. Eliza poured more coffee. Catherine made her choice. A brave, kind, foolish choice maybe, but hers. You can't take responsibility for that. "Can't I?" Before Eliza could answer, the sound of hoofbeats approached the house. Garrett stood frowning and moved to the window. "Someone's coming. Fast." They went to the door together. A rider was galloping up the path, his horse lathered with sweat despite the cold. As he drew closer, Eliza recognized him. Young Billy Preston, who worked at the general store in Dust Creek. "Mr. Cole!" Billy shouted, barely waiting for his horse to stop before dismounting. "There's trouble in town. That drunk Silas Kemper, he's going crazy threatening folks. He's got a gun and he's asking for you." Garrett's face went hard. "Why me?" "He's saying—" Billy glanced at Eliza, uncomfortable. "He's saying things about Mrs. Cole. Saying she's a saying bad things. Says you got no right to keep a woman like that someone needs to teach her proper respect. Ice flooded Eliza's veins. He's talking about me. Don't listen to him, ma'am. Everyone knows Silas is just mean drunk. But he's got that gun, and the sheriff's out of town, and... I'll handle it, Garrett said, already moving toward the stable. No. Eliza grabbed his arm. You can't go into town and face down a drunk man with a gun. You'll get yourself killed. He's threatening you. He's threatening the idea of me. He doesn't actually care about me specifically. He's just using me as an excuse to cause trouble. All the more reason I need to stop him. Garrett pulled free of her grip. Billy, ride back and tell people to stay inside. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Garrett, please. He turned back to her, and the look in his eyes was fierce, protective, almost frightening in its intensity. You're my wife. I don't care if it's on paper only. I don't care if we've never... He stopped himself. You're mine to protect. That means something. Then he was gone, riding hard toward town, and Eliza stood in the yard with her heart in her throat and Virginia's voice behind her. He's going to get himself killed, Virginia said flatly. Just like Catherine, always trying to save people who don't deserve it. Eliza whirled on her. I didn't ask for his protection. Doesn't matter. He's Garrett. He can't help himself. Virginia's face was haggard in the morning light, aged beyond her years by grief and bitterness. You should leave. Pack your things and go before he comes back. Before you get him killed, too. I'm not leaving. You're going to destroy him, just like Catherine did. Catherine didn't destroy him. She loved him. And he loved her. That's not destruction, that's just life being cruel. And what are you to him? Virginia demanded. You're not his wife, not really. You're not Catherine. You'll never be Catherine. I know that. Eliza's voice cracked. I've always known that. But I'm here, Mrs. Cole. I'm alive. I'm present. And I care what happens to him. Maybe that's not enough. Maybe it's not what you want. But it's all I have to offer. They stared at each other across the snow-covered yard, two women bound together by the same man, divided by everything else. Then Virginia turned and walked back into the house, leaving Eliza alone with her fear. The hours that followed were torture. Eliza tried to work kneading bread, scrubbing floors, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. But every sound made her jump. Every creak of the house made her heart race. Billy Preston had said Silas Kemper had a gun. Drunk men with guns were unpredictable, dangerous. What if Garrett confronted him? What if there was a fight? What if she couldn't finish the thought? Virginia emerged from her room around noon, her face composed, but her eyes red-rimmed. They prepared lunch in tense silence, neither acknowledging the empty place at the table where Garrett should have been sitting. He knows how to handle difficult men, Virginia said suddenly, as if reading Eliza's thoughts. He's not stupid. I know. He's also not invincible. I know that too. They lapsed back into silence, picking at their food without appetite. The afternoon dragged on with agonizing slowness. Eliza found herself standing at the window, staring down the road toward town, willing Garrett to appear over the ridge. When he finally did near sunset, relief hit her so hard she had to grip the windowsill to stay upright. He rode slowly, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion, but he was whole. Alive. Unhurt. Eliza met him at the stable, Virginia close behind her, despite her earlier coldness. Garrett dismounted stiffly, his face drawn and pale. What happened? Eliza asked. Kemper passed out in the street before I even got there. All that threatening and posturing, and he just collapsed in a puddle of his own vomit. Garrett's laugh was bitter. Billy made it sound like some great crisis. Turns out it was just a drunk man running his mouth. But he was threatening me, Eliza said. What he said doesn't matter. Half the town's probably saying the same things behind closed doors. Garrett looked at her with tired eyes. You know what the real crisis was, riding into town seeing people's faces when I came looking for the man who'd threatened you. They didn't look scared or worried. They looked satisfied. like they'd been hoping for exactly this kind of trouble. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we're not welcome in Dust Creek anymore, either of us." He started unsaddling his horse with rough, angry movements. "The whispers about you teaching those orphan children about us living in sin, about you being barren and cursed, they've been building for months. Kemper was just drunk enough to say out loud what everyone else is thinking." "Then we won't go to town," Eliza said. "We have to go to town. We need supplies, need to sell cattle, need to—" He stopped, frustration evident in every line of his body. "We can't just hide up here forever." "Why not?" Virginia spoke for the first time, her voice strange and distant. "I've been hiding for 3 years. It's surprisingly easy." Garrett turned to look at his mother, and Eliza saw something pass between them. Understanding maybe, or shared recognition of their own failures. "I don't want to hide," Garrett said quietly. "I'm tired of hiding." "Then what do you want?" Virginia asked. He looked at Eliza when he answered. "I want to live. I want to stop letting the past dictate the present. I want—" He stopped, seemed to struggle with something, then continued. "I want to mean the vows I never actually spoke. I want this to be real." Eliza's breath caught. "Garrett, I know we didn't marry for love. I know I bought you at an auction like livestock, and that's a shame I'll carry forever. But these past months, watching you try to make a home here, despite everything working against you, watching you care for those children who had nobody, watching you stand up to my mother and to me when we needed someone to call us on our grief." He took a step toward her. "You're the strongest person I've ever met, and I'd be honored if you'd actually be my wife. Not on paper, in truth." The world seemed to narrow to just the two of them standing in the stable as twilight painted the sky purple and gold. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs, her mind reeling. "I don't love you," she said, needing him to understand. "I care about you, I respect you, but I don't—" "I know. I don't love you either. Not yet." Garrett's smile was sad and honest. "But I think I could, given time, given choice. And I think maybe you could too." Could she? Eliza didn't know. Love seemed like such an impossible thing, a luxury she'd never been able to afford. But partnership, respect, shared purpose, those things she understood. Those things she could build on. "What would change?" she asked carefully. "If I said yes? Everything, nothing, I don't know." Garrett ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with his own inability to articulate what he meant. "I just know that right now you sleep upstairs in what used to be a sewing room, and I sleep downstairs like a guest in my own house, and we circle around each other like strangers. I want to stop circling. I want to actually share a life, not just occupy the same space." "You're asking me to share your bed." "I'm asking you to share more than that. Decisions, plans, the future, whatever it looks like." He met her eyes steadily. "But yes, eventually, if you're willing, I'd like to share that too. Not tonight, not until you're ready, but someday. Because I want a real marriage, Eliza. I want a partner, not hired help." Virginia made a small sound, protest or agreement, Eliza couldn't tell. But when she looked at the older woman, Virginia's face was unreadable. "I need time to think," Eliza said. "Take all the time you need." That night, Eliza lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, turning Garrett's words over in her mind like stones. He wanted a real marriage. He wanted her not as a replacement for Catherine, but as herself. The barren woman, the divorced woman, the woman who'd been sold for $30 and half her worth. Could she do this? Could she risk opening her heart to someone who might eventually resent her for what she couldn't provide? Children were everything in frontier society. Family legacy, proof of God's favor. And she couldn't give him any of that. But then she thought of his hand closing around hers across the kitchen table. His fierce protectiveness when he'd ridden off to defend her honor. The gentle way he'd spoken about Catherine, sharing his grief instead of hiding it. The coat he'd given her, the respect he'd shown her, the space he'd offered her to be angry and scared and imperfect. Maybe love didn't have to start with passion. Maybe it could start with honesty and grow from there. 3 days later, she found Garrett in his study going over the ranch accounts. He looked up when she entered, questions in his eyes. "Yes," Eliza said simply. "Yes. Yes, I'll be your wife. Really your wife. If you're certain that's what you want." Garrett stood slowly, setting down his pen with careful precision. "I'm certain. Are you?" "No," Eliza admitted. "But I'm willing to try. That's all I can promise." "That's enough." He crossed the room to her, moving slowly, as if afraid she might startle and run. When he reached her, he took both her hands in his. "We'll do this right. A real ceremony if you want. Vows spoken in front of witnesses. Your choice." "I don't need witnesses. I just need your word that you won't regret this." "I can't promise that. I can't promise anything except that I'll try my best to be a good husband. To see you respect, you care for you." His thumbs brushed across her knuckles. "Is that enough?" "It has to be." He kissed her then softly and carefully, as if she were something precious that might break. And Eliza kissed him back, tasting salt, whose tears she wasn't certain, and feeling the first small stirring of something that might someday become love. When they broke apart, Virginia stood in the doorway. Neither of them had heard her approach. Her face was pale, her hands clenched at her sides. "If you hurt him," Virginia said to Eliza, her voice shaking, "if you break his heart the way Catherine did," Eliza finished gently. "Mrs. Cole, I can't promise I won't hurt him. People who care about each other hurt each other sometimes. But I can promise I won't leave him. Not by choice. Not unless he sends me away." Virginia's eyes filled with tears. "Catherine promised that too." "Catherine died. That's different from leaving." "Is it?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable. Then Virginia turned and walked away, leaving Eliza and Garrett alone with their fragile, frightening new beginning. That night, for the first time, Eliza moved her belongings to Garrett's room. It felt strange, transgressive, like she was intruding on sacred space. But Garrett helped her, carrying her small bag, making space in the wardrobe for her dresses, moving Catherine's things, what few remained, to a trunk in the corner. "Are you sure?" Eliza asked as he closed the trunk lid. "I'm sure. She's gone. You're here. It's time I acknowledged that." They lay together that first night like strangers, careful not to touch, hyper-aware of each other's breathing. But eventually, tentatively, Garrett's hand found hers under the blankets. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving me another chance at this." "Thank you for asking," Eliza whispered back. And somewhere in the darkness in the room that had held so much grief, something new began to take root. Fragile as a seedling, uncertain as spring, but alive nonetheless. Winter deepened around Cole Ranch like a fist closing. The snow piled higher, the temperatures dropped lower, and the world contracted to the warm circle of the house, the barn, the daily routines that kept them all tethered to survival. And in that contracted world, Eliza and Garrett learned each other slowly, carefully, like people learning a new language, one word at a time. Sharing a bed proved easier than either expected. Garrett was careful almost painfully, so never reaching for her without asking. First, never assuming privileges he hadn't earned. They slept close for warmth, but separate in all other ways, and Eliza was grateful for his restraint, even as she wondered when, if that restraint would shift into something else. Virginia watched them with eyes that held equal parts suspicion, and something that might have been hope. She stopped spending entire days locked in Catherine's room, though she still went there often, emerging with red-rimmed eyes and a face carved from stone. But she also began joining them for breakfast without being called, began offering opinions on ranch business, began slowly, reluctantly rejoining the world of the living. "The fence by the north pasture needs mending before spring," she said one morning in January. "If we don't fix it now, we'll lose cattle when the thaw comes." Garrett looked up from his coffee, surprise evident on his face. His mother hadn't offered input on ranch management in 3 years. I know. I've been meaning to get to it. You've been meaning to get to it since October. Winter's half over. Stop meaning and start doing. A smile tugged at Garrett's mouth. Yes, ma'am. Eliza caught his eye across the table and saw her own cautious optimism reflected there. Virginia was fighting her way back. It was slow, painful work, but she was fighting. That afternoon, a knock came at the door, unusual enough in winter, that all 3 of them froze. Garrett answered it to find a man in a heavy coat, his face windburned and weary. Mr. Cole, I'm Robert Hutchins. I have business from the territorial office. Garrett stepped back, letting the man inside. What kind of business? Hutchins stamped snow from his boots and pulled papers from his coat. There's a new land verification program. Territories tightening up requirements for homestead claims. You need to prove continuous occupation improvements made and... He paused, glancing at papers. Legal marriage to any woman listed on the deed. Eliza's stomach dropped. I'm not on the deed. No, ma'am, but there's record of your marriage to Mr. Cole, such as it is. The territory wants verification that all relationships are legitimate, properly documented. We've had too many fraudulent claims, men buying women to establish false households, that sort of thing. We're not fraudulent, Garrett said, his voice tight. I'm not suggesting you are, but you'll need to provide proof. Marriage certificate, witness testimony, evidence of cohabitation. Hutchins looked uncomfortable. I know it seems invasive, but it's territorial law now. You have 30 days to submit documentation, or the claim could be challenged. After Hutchins left, they sat in the parlor in stunned silence. Finally, Virginia spoke. You don't have a marriage certificate. No, Garrett admitted. There was never a ceremony, just the bill of sale from the auction. That won't satisfy the territory. They'll see it as exactly what Hutchins described, a purchased woman, not a wife. Then we'll get married, Eliza said, properly, with a minister and witnesses. In Dust Creek. Garrett shook his head. After everything that's happened, they'd love nothing more than to refuse us. Then we go somewhere else. Another town, another minister. We get the certificate and submit it to the territory. Eliza's voice was stronger than she felt. We've come this far. We're not losing the ranch over paperwork. Virginia studied her for a long moment. You'd do that, legally bind yourself to him, to this place, when you could just walk away. Where would I go? My father made it clear I'm not welcome back. I have no money, no prospects, nowhere else to be. Eliza met the older woman's gaze steadily. Besides, I made a promise. I said I wouldn't leave unless Garrett sent me away. I meant it. Something shifted in Virginia's expression. Not warmth exactly, but a thawing. There's a minister in Laramie, Reverend Patterson. He's fair-minded, doesn't involve himself in Dust Creek politics. I'll write him a letter. Garrett looked at his mother in surprise. You'd do that? I don't want to lose this ranch. Your father built it, and Catherine loved it, and it's all we have left of them. Virginia's voice cracked slightly. If marrying this girl properly keeps it in the family, then we'll do what needs to be done. I'm sitting right here, Eliza said dryly. You can call me by my name. Fine. If marrying Eliza properly keeps the ranch, then we'll do it. But there was no venom in Virginia's tone, just exhaustion and reluctant acceptance. The letter went out the next day, and Reverend Patterson's reply came 2 weeks later. He would perform the ceremony if they could travel to Laramie. The journey was 2 days by wagon in good weather, potentially deadly in winter storms, but they had no choice. The deadline loomed. They left on a clear February morning, all 3 of them bundled against the cold. Virginia insisted on coming, claiming she needed to order supplies from Laramie's larger mercantile, but Eliza suspected it was something else, a need to witness this marriage, to make sure it was real, to give her blessing, even if she couldn't quite voice it. The journey was brutal. Wind cut through their coats like knives, and the horses struggled through drifts that reached their knees in places. They stopped overnight at a way station, sleeping in a freezing room with 6 other travelers too cold and exhausted for conversation. The second day proved even worse. A storm blew in around noon, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Garrett hunched over the reins, guiding the horses more by instinct than sight, while Eliza and Virginia huddled under blankets in the wagon bed. "We should stop," Virginia shouted over the wind. "Find shelter." "There's nothing between here and Laramie," Garrett called back. "We keep going or we freeze." They kept going, hours blurred together in the howling whiteness. Eliza lost all sense of direction, of time, of everything except the cold seeping through her layers, and the fear that they'd wandered off the road and would be found weeks later frozen solid. When lights finally appeared through the snow, she almost didn't believe them. But they were real, Laramie blessedly close, promising warmth and safety. Garrett drove straight to the church, knowing they needed help before they needed shelter. Reverend Patterson answered their frantic knocking, took one look at their frozen, desperate faces, and pulled them inside without question. His wife appeared with blankets and hot coffee, and they huddled by the stove, slowly thawing. "Thought you might not make it," Patterson said once they could speak again. "Storm came up fast. You're lucky." "Can you marry us?" Garrett asked, through chattering teeth. "Today?" "Son, you can barely stand. Let's get you warm first, fed and rested. Tomorrow's soon enough." But Garrett shook his head stubbornly. "The territory gave us 30 days. We're on day 28. If we don't make it back in time—" "Then do it now," Virginia interrupted. Her face was pale, her lips blue, but her voice was steady. "Marry them now, Reverend, before something else goes wrong." Patterson looked between them, seemed to understand there was more to this story than he'd been told, and nodded. "All right then. Mrs. Patterson, fetch the register. We'll do this proper, but we'll do it quick." So Eliza and Garrett stood before the small altar in their frozen, snow-covered clothes, while Patterson read from his Bible, and Mrs. Patterson and Virginia stood witness. It should have felt momentous, significant. But Eliza was too cold, too tired, too wrung out to feel anything except relief that they were alive and about to check a box on a territorial form. "Do you, Garrett Cole, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Eliza May, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the Wyoming Territory, I pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride." Garrett's lips were cold when they touched hers, but the kiss was gentle, genuine, and Eliza felt something flutter in her chest. Not love, not yet, but perhaps its first tentative stirrings. Patterson signed the certificate with a flourish and handed it to Garrett. "There. Legal as Sunday. Now get yourselves to the hotel and get warm before you catch your death." They did, renting 2 rooms, one for Virginia, one for the newly married couple. After a hot meal and several cups of coffee, warmth finally seeped back into Eliza's bones. She sat on the bed in their room, still wearing most of her clothes, while Garrett stood by the window, watching snow continue to fall. "We did it," he said quietly. "We're actually married now." "We were married before. This is just paperwork." "Is it?" He turned to look at her. "It feels different, more real." Eliza supposed it did. The vows spoken aloud, witnessed, recorded, they carried weight that a bill of sale never could. She was Eliza Cole now, not Eliza May. Not Eliza Hewitt, the name she'd carried briefly and shamefully from her first marriage. Eliza Cole, wife of Garrett Cole, mistress of Cole Ranch such as it was. "Are you all right?" Garrett asked, seeing something in her expression. "I don't know. Ask me tomorrow after I've slept and confirmed I still have all my toes." He smiled and sat beside her on the bed, carefully maintaining space between them. "For what it's worth, I'm glad we did this. Not just for the territory. For us." "Are you?" "Yes. I know this started wrong. God, everything about how we came together was wrong, But maybe we can make it right going forward. Maybe we can build something good from a bad beginning. Maybe, Eliza agreed. She was too tired to believe in maybes, but too hopeful to completely dismiss them. They slept that night fully clothed on top of the covers, too exhausted even to undress. And when Eliza woke in the darkness to find Garrett's arm draped across her waist, she didn't move away. She let herself be held, let herself feel safe, and fell back into dreamless sleep. The journey home took 3 days instead of 2. Fresh snow made the roads nearly impassable, and they had to stop frequently to rest the horses and wait out whiteouts. By the time they finally saw Cole Ranch in the distance, Eliza felt like she'd aged 10 years. But the certificate was safe in Garrett's coat pocket, and they'd made it back with a day to spare. They submitted the paperwork to the territorial office in Dust Creek, where the clerk looked at them with barely concealed disgust, but had to accept the legal documentation and returned home to begin the slow work of actually living as husband and wife, which proved more complicated than either expected. The physical intimacy came gradually, first holding hands in the dark, then cautious kisses goodnight that slowly deepened into something more. Then one night in early March, when winter was finally loosening its grip and the first hints of spring teased at the edges of the world, Garrett pulled Eliza close and whispered, "May I?" And Eliza, her heart pounding, but her mind certain, whispered back, "Yes." What followed was tender and awkward, and nothing like her first marriage, where Thomas had taken what he wanted with mechanical efficiency and blamed her when nothing came of it. Garrett touched her like she was precious, asked permission at every stage stopped when she tensed, and only continued when she gave him permission to proceed. It wasn't passion, not yet, but it was respect, and that mattered more. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Eliza felt tears sliding down her cheeks, though she didn't know why. "Did I hurt you?" Garrett asked, immediately worried. "No. You were kind. I'm not used to kindness." He pulled her closer, pressing his face into her hair. "Then I'll keep being kind until you get used to it, however long that takes." Spring arrived in earnest in April, bringing with it the work of preparing fields, mending winter damage, checking cattle. Garrett worked dawn to dusk, and Eliza worked alongside him when she could, learning the rhythms of ranch life. Virginia watched them with something approaching approval, occasionally offering guidance on tasks Eliza didn't understand. "The garden needs tilling," Virginia said one morning. "If you're going to be mistress of this ranch, you need to know how to feed it." So Eliza learned to garden, her hands blistering and her back aching, but her spirits lifting as green shoots pushed through dark soil, life returning after winter's death. It felt symbolic somehow, hopeful. In May, a letter arrived from Martha, Eliza's sister. She'd married a blacksmith from a neighboring town, she wrote, and was expecting a baby. She hoped Eliza was well and happy, hoped they could see each other again someday. The letter was careful, cautious, as if Martha feared their father might intercept it. Eliza wrote back immediately, telling Martha about the ranch, about Garrett, about finding unexpected contentment in a place she'd never expected to call home. She didn't mention the auction, the shame, the loneliness, only the present, which was improving day by day. In June, 3 things happened in quick succession that changed everything. First, Annie appeared at the kitchen door one morning, thin as a rail, but alive. "Heard you got married proper," she said without preamble. "Thought I'd come see if the invitation to learn still stood." Eliza pulled the girl into a fierce hug. "It absolutely does. Are the others with you?" "No. County home still has them. But I escaped and I'm not going back." Annie's jaw set stubbornly. "I'll work for my keep. I'll help with the ranch, but I'm not going back to that place." "You don't have to," Eliza promised. "You can stay here. We'll figure it out." Garrett, who'd appeared at the sound of voices, nodded his agreement. "We'll need to be careful. Technically, you're supposed to be in the county's custody, but this ranch is big enough that you can stay out of sight when needed." "Thank you," Annie whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you." The second thing happened a week later when a government surveyor arrived to verify the ranch's boundaries as part of the ongoing territorial documentation. He spent 3 days walking the property, measuring, recording, and at the end presented Garrett with revised papers. "Everything's in order," he said, "but I notice the deed only lists you as owner. Given that you're married, might want to add your wife's name. Protects you both if something happens to either one." Garrett looked at Eliza, a question in his eyes. She'd expected him to dismiss the idea property was passed through men, everyone knew that, but instead he said, "How do we do that?" The surveyor explained the process, and a week later Garrett brought home the revised deed. Both their names appeared at the top: Garrett Cole and Eliza Cole, joint owners of Cole Ranch. "You didn't have to do this," Eliza said, staring at the document. "Yes, I did. You work this land as much as I do. You've earned the right to your name on it. What will people say? Let them say what they want. I'm tired of living by other people's rules." Garrett took the deed and hung it on the wall in his study, right where everyone who entered could see it. "Most folks frame a wedding photo. We'll frame what gave us choice." It was a strange sort of wedding portrait, that legal document with their names side by side, but it meant more to Eliza than any photograph could have. It said, she belonged. Not by purchase, not by obligation, but by right. The third thing happened on a sweltering afternoon in late June. Eliza was in the garden when a rider approached, not from town, but from the direction of Dust Creek's far eastern edge. As he drew closer, her stomach dropped in recognition. Thomas Hewitt, her first husband. She stood frozen as he dismounted, his face older, but still handsome, his clothes expensive, his manner entitled. He'd always carried himself like a man who expected the world to arrange itself for his convenience. "Eliza," he said, as if he had any right to her name. "I heard you'd remarried. Came to see if it was true." "It's true. What do you want, Thomas?" "I want to talk to you. Alone." "No!" Garrett's voice came from behind her, hard as iron. Eliza hadn't heard him approach, but she was profoundly grateful for his presence. "Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of me." Thomas looked between them, calculating. "Fine. Eliza, I made a mistake divorcing you. I was young, stupid, listening to my father. But he's dead now, and I'm thinking clearly. I want you back." Eliza stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "You want me back?" "Yes. I've made arrangements. You can return to Boston with me, live properly again. You were always meant for better than—" he gestured dismissively at the ranch, "than this frontier life. You divorced me because I couldn't give you children. I was wrong. We'll adopt if we have to. The point is, you're my wife." "No, I'm not. You made sure of that. You stood in court and told everyone I was defective, broken, worthless. You sent me back to my father like damaged goods." "I said I was wrong." "You were 4 years too late being wrong." Eliza said, her voice shaking with fury. "You don't get to decide you want me back now that it's convenient for you. You don't get to waltz onto my property and expect me to fall at your feet with gratitude." "Your property," Thomas sneered. "Don't be ridiculous. Everyone knows women can't own land." "I can." Eliza pointed at the study window where the deed hung visible. "My name's on the deed, joint owner with my husband. This is my home, my land, my life. And you're not welcome in any of it." Thomas's face flushed red. "You're making a mistake. You think this backwater rancher can give you the life I can. You think—" "I think you should leave," Garrett interrupted quietly. His hand rested on Eliza's shoulder, a gentle but unmistakable claim. "You heard my wife. She's not interested." "Your wife." Thomas spat the words. "She was mine first." "No," Eliza said. "I was never yours. I was your possession, your property, something you owned until you decided I wasn't worth keeping. But I'm not anyone's possession now. I'm a partner, an equal, something you never understood and never will. You came too late." Garrett added, his voice still quiet, but carrying absolute authority. She was never something returned, so you cannot take her back. Thomas looked between them, seeming to finally understand that he'd lost. Whatever he'd expected, tears, gratitude, acquiescence, he wasn't going to get it. His face twisted with anger and humiliation. "You'll regret this," he said to Eliza. "When you're old and barren and stuck in this wasteland, you'll remember you had a chance at something better." "I already have something better," Eliza said simply. "I have dignity. I have respect. I have a husband who sees me as a human being, not as a womb that failed to perform. Now get off my property before I get my rifle." She wasn't bluffing, and Thomas knew it. He remounted his horse, shooting them both a look of pure venom, and rode away. Eliza watched him go, her whole body shaking with adrenaline and fury, and something that felt surprisingly like triumph. "Are you all right?" Garrett asked. "Yes. No. I don't know." She turned to face him. "Did you mean what you said about me being a partner, an equal, every word? Even though I'm barren, even though I can't give you children?" "Eliza." Garrett took both her hands in his. "I told you from the very first day I don't need children. I need you. That hasn't changed. It never will." She kissed him, then fierce and grateful, and felt something break open in her chest, something that had been locked away since Thomas first called her broken, since her father sold her, like livestock, since she'd learned that her worth was measured solely by her ability to breed. "I love you," she said against Garrett's mouth, surprising herself. "I don't know when it happened, but I do. I love you." His arms came around her, holding her tight. "I love you too. God help me, I do." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other while the sun beat down, and Annie watched from the house with a smile on her young face, and Virginia looked away from the window with tears in her eyes. That night, Virginia knocked on their bedroom door, the first time she'd sought them out since they'd married. When Garrett opened it, she stood in the hallway holding something wrapped in cloth. "This was Catherine's," she said, her voice rough. "The family Bible. It lists births and deaths, marriages. I want—" She stopped, struggling with the words. "I want you to add your marriage. Make it official in the family record." Garrett took the Bible carefully, reverently. Inside the front cover, names were written in fading ink, his grandparents, his parents, his own birth, and then Catherine's marriage to him, her death, the stillborn child. Below that, Garrett wrote in fresh ink, "Garrett Cole married to Eliza Cole, June 15, 1883. And beside it, in Virginia's shaky handwriting, "Welcomed." It was the closest Virginia had come to approval to acceptance, and Eliza felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Virginia nodded stiffly, unable or unwilling to say more, and retreated to her room. But the gesture spoke volumes. Eliza wasn't replacing Catherine. She wasn't erasing the past. She was simply being added to the family story, a new chapter, not a rewrite. As summer deepened and the ranch thrived under their joint care, Eliza found herself happier than she'd ever imagined possible. Annie had become like a daughter, helping with chores and learning to read properly. Virginia had thought enough to occasionally smile to offer advice without barbs, to sit with them at dinner and share memories of better times. And Garrett had become her partner in every sense, sharing work and dreams, and the slow building of a life neither had expected, but both treasured. She was not the woman she'd been at that auction. She was not the barren, worthless, shameful creature her father had sold for $30. She was Eliza Cole, co-owner of a thriving ranch, teacher to a determined young woman, wife to a man who saw her as an equal. She was, for the first time in her life, enough exactly as she was. And as she fell asleep in Garrett's arms each night, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was what redemption looked like. Summer gave way to autumn, and with the changing seasons came a subtle shift in Eliza herself. She noticed it first in small ways: a heaviness in her breasts, a queasiness that struck without warning, an exhaustion that no amount of sleep seemed to cure. She dismissed it as hard work catching up with her as the inevitable toll of ranch life on a body unused to such labor. But when she missed her monthly courses for the second time, a different possibility crept into her mind. One she immediately rejected as impossible. Barren, the doctors had said, defective, broken. Thomas had made sure everyone knew it, and her father had believed it enough to sell her. Yet her body insisted otherwise. The nausea worsened especially in the mornings. Her dresses grew tight around the waist, and one afternoon in late September, while lifting a heavy basket of vegetables from the garden, she felt it aflutter, quick as a butterfly's wing, unmistakable. She dropped the basket vegetables, scattering across the ground, and pressed both hands to her stomach. There it was again. Movement. Life. "Oh God," she whispered, her knees buckling. She sat hard in the dirt, trembling, her mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. It was impossible. Years of being told she was broken, years of believing it, years of building a life around that certainty, and now this. "Eliza." Garrett's voice came from somewhere nearby. "You all right?" She couldn't answer, couldn't form words. He appeared around the corner of the garden fence, saw her sitting in the dirt, and ran to her side. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" She stopped, afraid to say it aloud, afraid that speaking the words would make it untrue, would reveal it as delusion or wishful thinking. "Garrett, I think I'm pregnant." He went very still. "What? I know it's impossible. I know what the doctor said, what everyone believes, but I've missed my courses and I'm sick every morning, and just now I felt—" She grabbed his hand and pressed it to her stomach. "I felt something move." Garrett's face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. "Eliza, if this is, we need to be sure. We need to see a doctor." "I'm sure." Even as she said it, certainty settled over her like a benediction. "I'm pregnant, Garrett. I don't know how, I don't understand it, but I am." He stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. "Oh God," he whispered against her hair. "Oh God, Eliza." She felt wetness on her neck and realized he was crying. "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "I know we never planned for this, never expected." "Happy." He pulled back to look at her, tears streaming down his face. "I'm terrified. I'm overwhelmed. I lost Catherine and our baby, and the thought of going through that again." His voice broke. "But yes, I'm happy. If this is real, if you're really carrying our child, then I'm happier than I have any right to be." They sat in the garden together, holding each other, while the autumn sun slanted through the trees and vegetables lay forgotten in the dirt around them. Eventually they heard footsteps and looked up to find Virginia standing at the fence, staring at them. "What's happened?" she asked, her voice sharp with worry. Eliza stood slowly, Garrett's hand steadying her. "Mrs. Cole, I believe I'm with child." Virginia's face went through a series of expressions too quick to track: shock, disbelief, fear, and finally, something that might have been joy. "But they said you couldn't." "I know what they said. They were wrong." Virginia's hands gripped the fence rail, her knuckles white. "We need to get you to a doctor. Immediately. If you're pregnant, you need proper care. We can't. I won't lose another." She couldn't finish the sentence. "I'll take her to Laramie tomorrow," Garrett said, "to a real doctor, not the quack in Dust Creek who told her she was barren in the first place." So the next morning before dawn, they made the journey to Laramie once more. Annie stayed behind with Virginia, both of them trying to contain their nervous hope. The trip felt endless, every jolt of the wagon making Eliza fear she might lose this impossible gift before she'd even had it confirmed. Dr. Morrison was an older man with kind eyes and gentle hands. He examined Eliza thoroughly while Garrett paced outside the examination room, his footsteps echoing Eliza's own anxiety. "Well, Mrs. Cole," Morrison said, finally helping her sit up, "you are indeed pregnant. About 4 months along, I'd estimate." Eliza's hands flew to her stomach. 4 months. But I only just realized. It happens especially with first pregnancies, and given that you were told you couldn't conceive, I imagine you dismissed the early signs." He smiled. "But there's no dismissing it now. You're going to have a baby probably in late February or early March." "But how?" Eliza whispered. "They said I was barren. My first husband we tried for 2 years. Nothing." Morrison's expression grew serious. "Mrs. Cole, I've practiced medicine for 30 years, and I've learned that the human body is far more mysterious than any textbook admits. Sometimes what appears to be infertility is simply poor timing stress or—" He paused delicately. "An incompatible pairing. Your first marriage didn't produce children. That doesn't mean you were incapable. It may have meant the circumstances weren't right. So Thomas, my first husband, he might have been— I'm not going to speculate about another man's fertility. What I will say is that you're healthy. The baby seems strong, and you have every reason to expect a successful pregnancy. But you need to be careful. No heavy lifting. Plenty of rest, good food. And given the difficult winter travel, I'd recommend you stay close to home from December onward." When Eliza emerged from the examination room, Garrett stood immediately searching her face for answers. She couldn't speak, could only nod, and watched relief and terror chase each other across his features. 4 months, she managed finally. Due in late February. He swayed slightly, and Eliza grabbed his arm, worried he might actually faint. "Garrett, I'm all right. Catherine was 7 months along when—" He stopped, closing his eyes. "I'm terrified, Eliza. I can't lose you. I can't lose another child." "You won't." She said it with more confidence than she felt. "I'm strong. The doctor says I'm healthy, and I'm going to be careful. We're going to be fine." But she saw the fear in his eyes and knew it wouldn't leave until the baby was safely born and she was safely alive. The ghost of Catherine haunted him still, and the ghost of the child who'd lived less than an hour. The journey home was subdued, both of them lost in their own thoughts and fears and fragile hopes. When they finally arrived at the ranch, Virginia and Annie rushed out to meet them. "Well," Virginia demanded, her voice trembling. "It's true," Eliza said. "I'm pregnant, 4 months along." Virginia's knees buckled, and Annie caught her, helping her to a chair on the porch. The older woman sat with her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. When she finally looked up, tears streamed down her weathered cheeks. "Thank God," she whispered. "Thank God." Over the following weeks, the household shifted to accommodate Eliza's condition. Virginia took over the heavier chores without being asked, and Annie shadowed Eliza constantly, ready to help at a moment's notice. Garrett watched her with anxious eyes, jumping at every wince or complaint. "I'm not made of glass," Eliza protested after he'd forbidden her from climbing the stairs to hang laundry. "I'm pregnant, not dying." "I know. He struggled for words. "I need you to be careful. Both of you." She understood his fear even as it chafed, so she submitted to being coddled, to resting more than felt necessary, to accepting help with tasks she could have managed alone. For him, she would be careful. For their child, she would be safe. Word spread, as it always did in frontier communities. The Barren woman was pregnant. Impossible, scandalous, miraculous, depending on who was telling the story. Some claimed it proved she'd lied about being barren in the first place, that she'd tricked poor Thomas Hewitt into divorcing her. Others whispered that the child couldn't possibly be Garrett's, that she must have been unfaithful. But a very few said it was a blessing, that sometimes God worked in mysterious ways, and maybe the woman who'd been labeled broken was never broken at all. Eliza tried not to listen to any of it. She focused on her growing body, on the life fluttering inside her, on preparing the small room next to theirs as a nursery. Virginia pulled out baby clothes she'd saved from Garrett's infancy, yellowed with age, but still serviceable. Annie learned to knit and made tiny booties and caps, her young face fierce with concentration. December came, and with it the first heavy snows. Garrett made the last supply run to Laramie, stocking up on everything they might need if they were snowed in for weeks. He also brought home a midwife named Mrs. Fletcher, a sturdy woman in her 50s who'd delivered half the babies in 3 counties. Dr. Morrison recommended her, Garrett explained. She'll stay through your confinement, make sure everything goes smoothly, Mrs. Fletcher examined Eliza with brisk efficiency and declared her fit as a fiddle. Strong girl, good hips, babies positioned well. Shouldn't be any problems, but I'll be here just in case. Her presence eased some of Garrett's visible anxiety, though Eliza still woke sometimes in the night to find him watching her with haunted eyes. She'd take his hand and place it on her swollen belly, letting him feel their child kick and roll. "See," she'd whisper, "we're both here, both strong. We're going to be fine." "Promise me," he'd say. "Promise me you'll fight if something goes wrong." "I promise, but nothing's going wrong." Christmas came quietly. They decorated a small pine tree with paper ornaments Annie had made, and Virginia cooked a feast that left them all pleasantly stuffed. It was the first real celebration the house had seen in years, and Eliza felt the joy of it even through her exhaustion and swollen ankles. January proved brutal. Snow piled so high they could barely open the front door, and the cold was so intense that frost formed on the inside of the windows. Eliza spent most of her time near the fire, knitting tiny clothes and trying not to worry about the ordeal ahead. "My mother used to say childbirth was the price women pay for Eve's sin," Virginia said one afternoon sitting beside her. "But I think that's nonsense. Birth is hard because life is precious. If it came easy, we wouldn't appreciate it." "Were your labors difficult?" "With Garrett 14 hours start to finish. Thought I might die halfway through, but the midwife slapped some sense into me and I got back to work." Virginia's smile was wry. "You'll do the same. You're stronger than you think." "I hope so." "I know so. You survived that auction, survived my bitterness, survived a winter journey that should have killed you, survived Thomas Hewitt showing up and trying to claim you like lost property. You're a survivor, Eliza. This is just one more thing to survive." February arrived with slightly warmer temperatures, but heavier snows. Eliza was enormous now, her belly so large she could barely see her own feet. Every movement was an effort, every night a struggle to find a comfortable position. But the baby was active, constantly kicking and shifting, and Dr. Morrison had said that was a good sign. On February 28th, just after midnight, Eliza woke to a sharp pain in her lower back. She lay still, breathing through it, telling herself it was just the baby settling lower. But 20 minutes later, another pain came stronger this time. And she knew. "Garrett," she whispered, shaking his shoulder. "It's time." He was instantly awake, eyes wide with panic. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Get Mrs. Fletcher." What followed was a blur of activity. Mrs. Fletcher appeared with her birthing supplies, calmly taking charge. Virginia boiled water and brought clean linens. Annie hovered in the doorway until Mrs. Fletcher shooed her out, and Garrett stood beside the bed holding Eliza's hand so tightly she thought he might break her fingers. "You should leave," Mrs. Fletcher said to him. "This isn't work for men." "I'm staying." His voice left no room for argument. The labor was long. Dawn came and went, then midday, then afternoon. The pains came in waves, each stronger than the last, until Eliza thought she might break apart from the force of them. She understood now why Virginia had said she'd thought she might die. This felt like dying, like being torn apart from the inside. "I can't," she gasped during one particularly brutal contraction. "I can't do this." "Yes, you can," Garrett said fiercely. "You can do anything. You're the strongest person I know." "Listen to your husband," Mrs. Fletcher added. "The baby's almost here. Just a little more work." But the work seemed endless. Hours blurred together in a haze of pain and exhaustion. Eliza lost track of time, of everything except the primal need to push to finish this, to meet the child she'd carried for 9 impossible months. Finally, as twilight painted the sky purple and gold, Mrs. Fletcher said, "One more push, Mrs. Cole. Your baby's ready." Eliza gathered every ounce of strength she had left and pushed with everything in her. She felt something give way, heard a sound between a gasp and a cry, and then a baby's wail. High-strung, indignant. "It's a girl," Mrs. Fletcher announced, holding up a squirming, red-faced infant. A perfect, healthy girl. Eliza collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. Garrett was crying too, his whole body shaking with relief and joy. Mrs. Fletcher cleaned the baby quickly and placed her in Eliza's arms, and Eliza looked down at her daughter's scrunched face and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I'm your mama." The baby's eyes opened, dark and unfocused, but searching, and Eliza felt the last broken piece of herself click into place. She wasn't barren. She wasn't broken. She wasn't defective. She was a mother holding her daughter, and nothing anyone had ever said about her mattered anymore. "What should we name her?" Garrett asked, his finger gently stroking the baby's tiny hand. Eliza had thought about this for months, but only one name felt right. "Clara," she said. "It means bright clear. She's the clarity that came after all the confusion." "Clara Cole." Garrett tested the name, smiled. "It's perfect. She's perfect." Virginia appeared in the doorway, Annie peeking around her shoulder. When Virginia saw the baby, she let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "May I?" she asked, her hands already reaching. Eliza handed Clara to her grandmother, and Virginia held the infant with practiced ease, tears falling freely down her weathered face. "She's beautiful," Virginia whispered. "She's absolutely beautiful. Catherine would have loved her." It was the first time Virginia had spoken Catherine's name without pain, and Eliza understood what this meant, not forgetting, but making room for new joy alongside old grief. That night, after everyone had taken turns holding Clara and the house had settled into peaceful quiet, Garrett pulled out the family Bible. By lamplight he wrote in careful script, "Clara Rose Cole, born February 28, 1884, to Garrett Cole and Eliza Cole." And beneath it in his own hand, "Because Virginia's shook too much, chosen to love, and now loved so much, she gives life." "That's not quite accurate," Eliza said from the bed, Clara sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I didn't give life because I was loved. I gave life because my body finally had the right circumstances. Love just made those circumstances possible." "Semantics," Garrett said, but he was smiling. "The point is, everyone said you couldn't. They said you were broken, barren, worthless. And they were all wrong. They were wrong about a lot of things." Eliza looked at her sleeping daughter, at her husband, at the life they'd built from such broken beginnings. They were wrong that love has to look a certain way. They were wrong that family has to be born from passion or tradition. They were wrong that worth is measured by what you can produce instead of who you are. Garrett came to sit beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders. "We should tell her," he said, "when she's old enough. We should tell Clara how we met, how you were sold at auction, how everyone said you were broken. And then we'll tell her that you were never broken, the people who labeled you were just too limited to see your worth. We'll tell her that family isn't born, it's built," Eliza added. "That love rooted in respect can turn barren soil into a blooming field. And that sometimes," Garrett finished, "the greatest miracles come from the darkest beginnings." Spring arrived early that year, as if the world itself was celebrating Clara's birth. The snow melted, revealing grass already pushing green through the earth. Annie took over many of the household chores, insisting that Eliza rest and heal. Virginia sang lullabies to Clara in a cracked voice that hadn't carried a tune in years. And Garrett spent hours just watching his wife and daughter, as if afraid they might disappear if he looked away. When Clara was 6 weeks old, Eliza bundled her up and carried her outside for the first time. They walked through the still bare orchard behind the house, an orchard Garrett had started planting the previous fall, saying every child should grow up with trees to climb. "Look," Eliza whispered to her daughter, pointing at the tiny buds just beginning to form on the branches. In a few weeks, these will bloom. White and pink blossoms everywhere. Your papa planted these for you. Clara, who understood nothing but her mother's voice, made a gurgling sound that might have been agreement. Behind them, Garrett worked on a wooden sign he'd been carving for weeks. When he finished, he showed it to Eliza before hanging it on the orchard gate. Eliza's orchard, where barren soil bloomed. "That's beautiful," Eliza said, tears pricking her eyes. "But you should add something." "What?" "Not from blood, from love, and sometimes love brings life." So Garrett carved those words beneath the first, and when he hung the sign on the gate, it felt like a declaration. A testimony. A truth that no one could deny. Word of Clara's birth spread through the territory, and with it came visitors. Some were genuinely happy for them neighbors, who'd always been kind, the Reverend Patterson and his wife from Laramie. Even a few families from Dust Creek, who'd never believed the cruel gossip. But others came out of morbid curiosity, wanting to see the miracle baby born to the barren woman. Eliza turned them all away at the door. "She's not a spectacle," she told one particularly persistent busybody. "She's my daughter, and she deserves privacy and respect." Martha came in April, bringing her husband and showing off her own swollen belly. The sisters spent 3 days catching up, sharing stories, marveling at how much their lives had changed. "Father asks about you sometimes," Martha said carefully. "He won't admit he was wrong, but I think he regrets what he did." "I don't care if he regrets it or not," Eliza said simply. "He's not part of my life anymore. He made that choice when he sold me." "Do you hate him?" Eliza considered the question, bouncing Clara gently in her arms. "No, I pity him. He threw away his daughter because she didn't meet his expectations. That's his loss, not mine." By May, Clara was smiling and cooing, reaching for everything with chubby fists. The orchard burst into bloom exactly as predicted, covering the ground in white and pink petals. Eliza sat beneath the flowering trees with her daughter and felt so full of contentment she thought she might burst. This was what she'd been looking for all along, she realized. Not validation from people who'd judged her. Not revenge on those who'd hurt her. Just this peace purpose, love freely given and gratefully received. Annie started teaching again, just a few children from neighboring ranches, whose families didn't mind that their teacher was barely 16 herself. She held lessons in the barn, just as Eliza had, and Eliza would watch from the house with Clara in her arms and feel pride swell in her chest. "You did that," Garrett said, coming up behind her. "You showed her that teaching matters, that children matter. Now she's passing it on." "We did that," Eliza corrected. "You let me teach when everyone said I shouldn't. You supported me when it would have been easier not to. We're a team, remember? The best team." He kissed the top of her head, then Clara's. "My 2 favorite people in the world." One afternoon in June, a year after Thomas Hewitt had shown up demanding Eliza return to him, another visitor arrived. But this time, it was a lawyer from Boston carrying papers and a message. "Mr. Hewitt has remarried," the lawyer explained. "His new wife is expecting a child. He wanted me to convey that he now understands the situation was not as he previously believed your fault. He offers his apologies and wishes you well." Eliza read the letter the lawyer handed her, brief, formal, completely inadequate, and laughed. Not bitterly, just incredulously. "He's apologizing now because his new wife got pregnant and he realized the problem was never me. It appears so, ma'am. Please tell Mr. Hewitt that I accept his apology for whatever peace of mind it gives him. But also tell him that I stopped caring about his opinion the day I realized my worth wasn't determined by his judgment. He's welcome to his new wife and child. I have everything I need right here." After the lawyer left, Garrett found her in the orchard, Clara sleeping peacefully in a basket at her feet. What did he want? Thomas remarried. His new wife is pregnant. He finally figured out he was the problem, not me. Eliza shook her head. "All those years I believed I was broken because he said so. All that shame, that self-hatred, that certainty that I was worthless, and it was based on nothing but one man's inability to admit he might be the one who was defective. "Are you angry?" "No, I'm free." She looked up at the blossoms falling like snow around them. "For the first time in my life, I'm completely free. Not because Thomas apologized or because I proved him wrong by having a baby. I'm free because I finally understand that my worth was never about him or my father or anyone else's opinion. It's about how I see myself. And I see a woman who's strong, capable, loved, and valuable with or without a child." "You are all those things," Garrett agreed. "You always were. Some of us were just lucky enough to see it." That summer they built a proper schoolhouse on the ranch, a small structure but solid and well made. Annie would teach there, and any child in the territory who wanted to learn was welcome. They called it Eliza's School for Hearts Not Heirs. And when Garrett carved that name above the door, Eliza felt the last piece of her broken past finally heal over. This was her legacy. Not the children she'd been told she couldn't have, not the worth she'd been told she didn't possess, but this, a place where every child mattered, where love meant more than blood, where chosen families were celebrated as fiercely as born ones. On Clara's first birthday, the whole valley seemed to come alive with celebration. Neighbors arrived bearing gifts, practical things, mostly baby clothes and blankets and jars of preserves, but also bringing their children to play and their stories to share. The ranch that had been silent as a tomb just 2 years ago now rang with laughter and life. Virginia made a cake, her first attempt at baking something celebratory in years. It was lopsided and slightly burned on one side, but everyone ate it anyway and declared it delicious. Annie made Clara a rag doll carefully stitched and embroidered with the little girl's initials. And Garrett presented Eliza with a leather-bound journal. "For recording Clara's life," he explained. "Her first words, her first steps, all the moments we don't want to forget. But also," he paused, suddenly shy, "also your thoughts, your story. Because someday Clara's going to ask how her parents met, and we need to tell her the truth. All of it. The hard parts and the beautiful parts, and everything in between." So that night, after the guests had left, and Clara slept peacefully in her crib, Eliza opened the journal and began to write. She wrote about the auction in Dust Creek, about being sold for $30, about Garrett's quiet words. "I don't need children. I need someone who knows how to stay." She wrote about Virginia's bitterness and Annie's fierce loyalty, and the long, hard winter when they'd all learned to become a family. She wrote about Thomas Hewitt's cruelty and his eventual apology about teaching orphan children and losing them to other people's fear about the moment she'd felt Clara move inside her and realized everything she'd been told was wrong. And finally, she wrote about love, not the passionate, all-consuming love of poetry and novels, but the steady, chosen love that built lives instead of burning through them. The love that said, "I see you, and you matter, and we're in this together." This, Eliza thought as she wrote, this is what it means to bloom from barren soil. Not proving everyone wrong. Not achieving the impossible. Just choosing every single day to see yourself as worthy. To build a life on respect and partnership. To love fiercely even when fear says it's safer not to. To believe that family is what you make it, not what blood dictates. She closed the journal and looked around the room at her sleeping daughter, at her husband reading by lamplight at the home they'd built together from such broken beginnings. Outside, the orchard rustled in the evening breeze, heavy with growing fruit. In the barn, horses nickered softly. From Virginia's room came the sound of humming an old lullaby, half-remembered but beautiful still. This was enough. More than enough. This was everything. And as Eliza climbed into bed beside Garrett, his arm coming around her automatically, protectively, lovingly, she allowed herself one final thought before sleep claimed her. They'd said she was barren, broken, worthless, but they were wrong about everything that mattered, because love doesn't grow from perfection. It grows from choice, and she'd chosen this life, this man, this family with everything she had, and that made her richer than any woman who'd ever stood in judgment of her would ever understand.